Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining me on this day that brings back a host of memories. I know for me, and I'm sure for many of you. A year ago today, insurrectionists, egged on by Donald Trump, tried to overturn the will of the American people in terms of who they chose for a presidential election. I was on the floor of the Senate a year ago when that mob of thugs broke into the Capitol, frankly, looking for blood, looking for the blood of the Speaker, looking for the blood of the Vice President, and candidly would have taken down any member of the Congress or the Senate, Democrat or Republican, because they were whipped into this frenzy put forward by Donald Trump about a big lie that is still spreading poison throughout the population of this country. And it's more than a little bit sobering that a year later, 30, 35, 40% of Americans still believe that big lie. And somehow or the other, and I don't understand this, when they see the images of Capitol Police being attacked, the Capitol being defiled, somehow have accepted the notion that nothing went wrong on that day. I find it stunning in my mind that any member of Congress, even the most ardent Trumpite, could somehow put forward that what happened a year ago wasn't a disaster for our country, wasn't a disgrace. And we in this nation are still reeling from that event. I also, reflecting back today on the courage of the Capitol Police that protected not just the lives of the members of Congress, but protected the lives of the staff, the cafeteria workers, the janitors. Thousands of people work here on Capitol Hill every day. Many of them have no interest in politics. This is just a job. But all of those folks' lives were put in jeopardy. And the Capitol Police, who were under siege that day, many of them hurt, few of them died. It is incumbent upon us to remember that. I also am going to speak later today on the floor of the Senate on the issue of how Virginia and Virginians in particular helped provide order. We saw a year ago enormous challenges when the then White House somehow bureaucratically wouldn't allow the National Guard to be called in on that day. So who came in and responded? Well, the D.C. Metropolitan Police, obviously, but it was also the Maryland State Police and the Virginia State Police who were here that afternoon of January 6th. And I thank particularly the Virginia State Police for their efforts. We also know we had over 20,000 National Guard that were brought in for 3 weeks after January 6th through the inauguration into early February. And over 10% of all the Guard that were deployed on the Capitol grounds were Virginia National Guard. And I went and visited them as they were patrolling and protecting the Capitol. And to think about these men and women, many of whom had been deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan in the past, being deployed with razor wire around the Capitol to protect the capital of our country from other Americans was more than a sobering notion. And I remember visiting with the Guard, and I think many of them young men and women, but kind of wrestling with the idea that they were protecting literally the halls of democracy against fellow Americans who wanted to overturn an election. I also visited with the Guard and thanked them along with Governor Northam and Senator Kaine for their literally weeks and weeks of being deployed through the middle of January and again into early February. And I will thank them again publicly today on the floor of the Senate. Last comment, I know we got a lot of people on the line. This effort in terms of overturning an election unfortunately didn't end on January 6th. We've seen supporters of the former president go out and in state after state try to dramatically restrict Americans' right to vote, in some cases even try to restrict or change that who certifies elections, no longer being an independent board, but somehow turning it over to a partisan group where a state legislature could overturn the will of the people in a certain state, or restrict the ability in urban areas to have access to drop boxes and other tools that have been used for years in voting. And this assault on democracy is so much bigger than any other particular issue. It's one of the reasons why I now support changing the filibuster rules. It makes no sense that we're trying to protect the rights of the minority in the Senate at the expense and cost of protecting and abolishing the rights of the minority Americans and young Americans and old Americans to vote in terms of choosing who those members of Congress are. So it's my hope that we'll see some progress on that in the coming days as well. So sobering day today, and appreciate all you being on. And Val, I'll be happy to start taking some questions.
Okay, the first question comes from Mitchell Miller at WTOP. Mitchell, are you there? Okay, we will go to Annie from WSLS.
Good morning, Senator Warner, and thank you so much for hosting this today. Just kind of reflecting on, you kind of mentioned this a little bit in your opening remarks, but looking ahead to the future, what would you like to see done from potentially preventing something like this from ever happening again? What are the next steps that you guys will continuing to be taking, to make sure that you all and everyone at the Capitol could be safe?
Well, I think we have made progress. One of the things we saw a year ago was that the Capitol Police were hugely under-resourced. They didn't have the equipment to protect themselves. Many of them didn't even have shields and the right kind of helmets, and consequently an awful lot of injuries that could have been prevented. All of the leadership of the Capitol Police and the Sergeant of Arms in the House and the Senate have been replaced. New leadership is in place, number one. Number two, more resources have gone to the Capitol Police. Number three, they've set up an intelligence unit, and I'm chairman of the Intelligence Committee, and I am absolutely focused on making sure the Capitol Police gets real-time intelligence of potential threats, because clearly a year ago, this was not a secret that something was going to happen. And intelligence threats, some of this, which we even originated out of Norfolk, didn't get conveyed to the Capitol Police in a timely way. That has been corrected, but we've got to keep relentless to make sure that that intelligence continues to get shared on a regular basis. We've changed the law to make sure that we still don't know why the National Guard wasn't fully brought in. I think there was either bureaucracy or incompetence that prevented that from happening. We now have changed the law to allow the Capitol Police, without going through the White House or some other process, to bring in the National Guard directly if they're under assault. Now, we've still got ways to go. We're still short, I think, 457 officers for a full component on the Capitol Police, so we need to do a better job of recruitment and retention. That's a challenge for recruiting police officers anywhere in America, but we've got to put extra effort behind that. So let's make sure that we're safe and secure in terms of the police and other assets that can be brought in to protect the Capitol and the right intelligence. That's number one. Number two, I think we need to do all we can to reaffirm America's faith that our voting processes are secure. I take great pride in the fact that in Virginia, we dramatically expanded voting this year. And we got a Republican governor. So this is not, expanding voting should not be viewed as a partisan lens. And I appreciate the fact that Governor-elect Youngkin acknowledged that in Virginia we have safe and secure elections. We need to have that same level of confidence across the nation. And how we grapple with not only the Trump big lie, but his devotees in these states who spin tales with no factual basis, but they still undermine people's faith in our election process, really scares the heck out of me. I mean, I think wasn't there like 67 lawsuits brought by Donald Trump, and all of them got dismissed? Any independent analysis shows that there were if any kind of voter fraud took place in 2020, it was in the low hundreds, wouldn't have changed the results in any states. And I think this question about faith in our electoral process really goes to an area where we in Congress have been awful, and that is putting some guardrails on social media. The amount of misinformation and disinformation that takes place, and perhaps the most irresponsible character of all, Facebook, who is always a day late and a dollar short on cleaning up that misinformation and disinformation, whether it's about when Russians interfered, or whether it's about vaccine misinformation, or whether it's about perpetrating the big lie. But we got to put some guardrails on social media, and my hope is that we will do that this year in a way that is able to help restore people's faith in the process. And finally, we need people of courage of all political persuasions, Democrat, Republican, liberal, conservative, to realize that what is happening in our country today, I never thought would happen. I never thought I'd see in my lifetime an assault on our Capitol. I never thought I'd see in my lifetime where a third of Americans believe something that is absolutely proven to be fake and false by any independent source, the question about who won the 2020 presidential election. We need people of goodwill of both parties and all parties and independents to step up and come to the aid of our democracy, because when you see the fact that over 60% of the American people thinks democracy is under assault, well, if we don't stand up and protect that democracy, all of our armed forces that protect our democracy from foreign adversaries will not get us results if we are being, in a sense, attacked from within. So we've still got work to do.
The next question comes from Kristen at WSET.
Hi, Senator. I wanted to change things up a little bit and ask you a question about some of the aftermath of the storm on Monday. An Amtrak train was stuck here in Lynchburg for 30 hours on Monday. We received calls from passengers right and left begging for some help, saying they were getting zero information from Amtrak, and they were also saying there was food and water and medication issues. We reached out to Amtrak, received very little information. Also reached out to who we thought was overseeing Amtrak, and they say they're just in charge of themselves. So is there anything that can be done at the federal level to hold Amtrak accountable for situations like this, or at least make sure that it doesn't happen again?
Listen, I think I've read about what happened in Lynchburg. I obviously focus as well, and my friend of 42 years, Tim Kaine, got stuck for 27 hours on I-95, so let me address briefly both of these. On Amtrak, it is not okay for Amtrak to stonewall why they couldn't have kept folks on that train better informed and gotten relief to them. Now, I'm not going to second guess how in the midst of a blizzard, how easy it would have been to remove the tree that was across the track. I want to get more facts on that. But it appears this lack of information coming from Amtrak on how they couldn't get relief for the folks on this train, that's not acceptable. And I'm going to be working with other members of the delegation to get answers from Amtrak so that we can make sure this doesn't happen again. Or if it does happen again, we can't say we're never going to have another blizzard, or we're never going to have a track that may be blocked. But we all know with cell phones and communication, we're always connected. It is inexcusable if you don't have an ability to communicate with people real time when they're in that kind of situation. And I would say the same for VDOT. It's only been 2 days, and I want to give, as a former governor, I want to make sure we get all the facts. And I know from my friend Tim Kaine, who was literally caught in that traffic for 27 hours, he did say he had seen some indications of VDOT personnel coming down on the southbound 95, stopping and getting out and trying to go across and assist people. But that sounds like it was a one-off. I'd like to get data on what kind of personnel were deployed, why there wasn't an earlier notification on a regular basis. That's why we have all these alert systems. So I think in both cases, both in terms of Amtrak and in terms of 95, we've got more answers to come. We can't prevent storms. We can't prevent jackknifing of trucks, or we can't prevent a tree limb falling on a railroad track, but we sure as hell ought to be able to make sure that we can communicate with people when they are caught and in need, and give them more timely, up-to-date information. And in both cases, that didn't seem to be the case. And on the Amtrak, rest assured, I'm going to take this on with other members of the delegation and get you those answers.
Next up is Melissa from WTVR.
Hi, Senator Warner. Thanks so much for doing this. Just touching on the 95 situation a little bit more, specifically about the National Guard. We've asked several times why they weren't activated either preemptively or once the storm had started, and we've been given kind of a confusing response from the governor and then other emergency officials around here saying, it takes 12 to 24 hours to mobilize them. But what I keep pointing out is that, within 12 to 24 hours, the storm was still ongoing and people were still stuck. So do you think the Virginia National Guard should have been activated preemptively or at all?
Well, again, I'm going to wait and get a full readout from the governor's office and VDOT. But I remember hearing about the storm before it hit. And at first, the predictions were 3 to 6 inches. You don't call out the National Guard for a 3 to 6 inch storm. Now, obviously, there were some predictions of higher levels of snow, Fredericksburg South. And it does take time. You don't have National Guard if they've not been called up. Remember, our National Guard are citizen soldiers who work day jobs. They have to be mustered. I know when we talked about the role of the National Guard coming to the Capitol, I still remember a young man I met who lived in Arlington, came home from work, had to go. I think they got mustered at that point down in Newport News, and then had to come back up to the Capitol. That took 6, 8, 10 hours. The question I have is not only second guessing about what the Guard did, but where were other state police, VDOT? Could there not have been some use of local law enforcement in some of the counties? 95 is a highway where state police are used. What were the level of VDOT personnel and state troopers that were available? From what I've read in the press, they didn't feel it was a lack of personnel. Why those personnel weren't deployed is one of the answers I still think we deserve to get.
The next question comes from Joe Thomas at WCHV.
Senator Warner, thanks again for holding this availability. Boy, you've set up, I could ask 15 or 16 questions, but I'm going to keep it to one and a follow-up. You mentioned tales with no factual basis. Does that also include, or are there some factual basis to the claims that people have been denied the ability to vote when you talk about voting access? And regarding the incursion at the Capitol on January 6th, should there have been, in the efforts of equal justice under the law, similar investigations after the riots that caused lots of private property damage on January 21st, 2017?
Let me take those in reverse order, Joe. January 21st, 2017.
President Trump, the day after Inauguration Day for President Trump.
Oh, when there was the Women's March.
Madonna and...
Yeah, well, I guess my question, Joe, would be family members participated in that. I think I remember those images of many more people who showed up to express their First Amendment rights than showed up at Donald Trump's inauguration. I know that bothered him for years to come. I strongly support anybody's First Amendment right. I strongly, the ability for Donald Trump to whip that crowd into a frenzy on the ellipse, I think that falls within First Amendment rights. To go in and rampage the Capitol, to beat up cops, have deaths take place. I hope you're not implying, Joe, there's some equivalency between that insurrection and a peaceful demonstration that took place. So let me finish, Joe. And so I think they are both a difference in kind and different. And if I know there has been in many cases in the aftermath of George Floyd, even in Richmond, for example, there was property damage, and I think that ought to be pursued. I think if you break the law, you ought to be prosecuted. Beginning, end of statement. In terms of the other part of your question, Joe, quickly again, because I make sure I get to everybody here.
It was you mentioned tales with
right,
no factual basis.
Let's on voting. I guess this, Joe, there were 66 lawsuits brought. If there was any evidence of voter fraud, unless you're now impugning the integrity of the judicial system as well, the judicial system found unanimously these claims of Donald Trump and his henchmen were baseless. There's been a half dozen independent analysis. There was even this cooked up, fifth level of voting review by a illicit group in Arizona that couldn't prove anything. Matter of fact, it showed Trump had lost more votes from the recount. So you show me evidence of voter fraud, it ought to be investigated. But as Governor-elect Youngkin has said, let's stay with Virginia for a moment. I'm proud of our system. It worked. The votes were counted. And it is outrageous to me that you've got state after state now trying to restrict people from voting and, frankly, then trying to turn over who counts and certifies elections to a partisan group, because that is not only awful in terms of states where it may disenfranchise minorities or Democrats, but you could then very well see in Democratic states people trying to take away the independent counting of votes. This would be a path to the demise of our democracy.
Okay, and the next question comes from Doug at WHRO.
Hi, thanks, Senator. The question, if we can change the subject a little regarding Build Back Better, one would assume that's going to come up again in the next session. Might a better strategy be to bring individual bills forward instead of one very large package?
Well, part of the reason why it's all been put into one package, because we know we're not going to get any Republican support, is by using reconciliation. That is a process where you only need 51 votes. I know Senator Manchin well. I continue to talk with him. He's shared concerns. I shared some of these concerns that maybe Build Back Better should have been more focused on fewer items, not only in terms of to make sure that they're fully paid for, but one of the things I say, this as a former governor, the ability of the federal government, or the state government for that matter, to start and implement a variety of new programs simultaneously, our record's been a little bit mixed. And we have a lot to implement right now. For example, on the infrastructure bill, there's close to 30 new programs in the infrastructure bill. That doesn't mean, though, that we should walk away. Particularly, I say this as a business guy more than a politician. We need more people back in the workforce, particularly women. We still have number of women who've dropped out post COVID, not going back because they don't have access to childcare. So childcare, early childhood education, things that are both long-term needed that every other industrial country in the world has, and will allow families to get their moms and dads back to work. I think that makes sense as a pro-growth item going forward. So I'm still working on component parts of the bill. And I do think the reason why they're lumped together is to be able to use the process called reconciliation so they can all be voted on at once. If they were broken out, you could use reconciliation on one item, but all the other items would then require 60 votes. And as we've seen, with the exception of the infrastructure bill, and frankly, a bill that the president needs to push more, and that is our bill about providing semiconductors and standing up against the challenges that China poses. That got 68 votes in the Senate, and it blows my mind that the House still hasn't taken it up, and the president needs to get stronger behind that. That is both a pro-job growth bill, would help us in Virginia in terms of additional semiconductor factories being placed in America, and I think we get some of those here in Virginia. But it's also a very important message to China in terms of national security, that we are going to compete with China and not allow all the semiconductor production to go offshore. So those are two areas, but that I've that have gotten 60 votes, but as you well know, for those who follow, it's a challenge to get 60 votes on more traditional domestic items.
Okay. The next question comes from Mike at Kingsborn Times News. Mike, are you there?
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, I'm still here. Thank you, Senator. Back in late summer, when the gubernatorial campaign was going on, the Attorney General-elect made a comment, close quote, that we want to make it easier to vote, but want to make it harder to cheat. Do you think that that's really an issue in Virginia?
I think it's pretty outrageous. I don't care what political party you belong to or what you're running for, but if you got evidence of cheating in Virginia, bring it forward. Bring it forward to our electoral board, bring it forward to the courts, bring it forward to legislators. But I think people, and I know if you're a candidate for office, you say stupid stuff. But, and I've said stupid stuff, so let me be clear. I'm saying it happens to all of us. But when you play fast and loose with the integrity of our voting system, and when you've got people like Donald Trump perpetrating a big lie, any candidate that tries to advance that big lie or undermines the faith in our electoral system, when there is no evidence of that, and I again want to commend Governor-elect Youngkin for validating that our systems in Virginia were safe and secure, I think that's pretty darn irresponsible.
The next question comes from Kelly Myers at News Nation. Kelly, are you there? If not, we can move on to Amy Knowles at the Virginia Dogwood.
Hey, Senator Warner, thanks for taking our questions. For those who still don't believe what happened a year ago was wrong, is there a way to bridge that topic? And if so, how?
Great question. I know we got differences in this country, and we may have difference about what policy ought to work or what idea ought to be put forward, but I don't understand anyone that could look at those images that I'm sure are playing on TV all day today of what happened on January 6th and not believe that these were insurrectionists out for blood. I can tell you, I was there. There wasn't a member of the Senate, no matter what they say now, that wasn't outraged by what these marauders did on the floor of the Senate. Now, they may have had revisionist history after the fact, but I can tell you that day when we were down huddled watching these thugs defile the Capitol, those few senators who were part of the big lie, people there, other senators, staff members, cops, kitchen staff who were all huddled there, they couldn't even look those people in the eye. So I don't know how you don't believe those images. I don't know how you don't believe the police officers who were wounded, assaulted, attacked from their testimony. I don't, we can again argue about policy, but I think anyone that doesn't accept the facts and the tragedy of what happened a year ago in this building, I just don't understand them. That may be a bridge too far. If you somehow believe that January 6th was just a normal day of tourists visiting the Capitol, I don't know what to say to you.
Okay, the last question will be from Kelly Meyer. We'll try one more time, and if not, that will be the conclusion.
Val, did Mitchell want to ask a question? I know Mitchell was the first person, but did he?
Yeah, Mitchell wasn't able to make it, but we will be sending him the audio.
Okay, great. Well, listen, everybody, I know I'm down to my last 40 seconds here. I want to thank you all. I mean, this is a sobering and somber day for our country. But let me tell you, I stay optimistic. The greatest thing about our nation is we can bounce back from anything. And as President Biden said today, our democracy is under assault, and we need all of us to stand up. Not stand up for one political party over another, but stand up for for the basic notion that in America, the voters choose their leaders and the will of the people expressed through the ballot box is honored. That is the core of being America. Thanks so much.